So a bunch of people have been asking me, like, what do I use to record my drums? I don't see any microphones. What kind of sorcery is this? The stars are not in position for this bullshit. And the answer is very simple. I use this. This is the only thing I use to record my drums pretty much. Well, sometimes I'll blend in the audio from the camera, but it's not all the time because camera audio is generally not very good. Alright, before we get on with this video, I want to say that I'm not a sound technician, I'm not a producer, and this is not a guide on how to get a great, amazing professional drum sound with a shitty budget, because $100 just doesn't get you very far. What this is, however, is a video about using the resources that you have, and it's actually more about the gear that you're using and the way you utilize that gear, like the way you play the drums. I will go through like my mic setup, how to get this mic and how I usually go about recording and whatever, but this is more about playing the drum set in a way that makes it easier to record with limited resources. Alright, so first off, this mic is pretty much all I use. It's a Zoom H1 mic, and the only reason why I bought this one ahead of any other mic was that it was cheap. It's cheap and it's simple to use, and I was like, well, I don't know anything about sound engineering and recording in general, so I'll just buy this thing. And I think I get like decent results out of it. Obviously it's not professional studio quality because I'm not an engineer, and this is a $100 microphone. It's just a standard handheld mic. You just press record and then you go. There are a bunch of settings, of course. I use the low cut filter, and I've disabled the auto level, and I've set the input level to 11 because that's just the sweet spot where you can hear everything on the drum set, but it doesn't cap completely out. As for microphone placement, I just put it pretty much dead center of the room. I try to raise it a bit so it don't get too much reflection of the walls, the ceiling, or the floor for that matter. I try to just place it, just in the middle of everything, really. There might be a much better way to place this microphone, and if you've got any ideas, leave a comment, let me know, because I honestly have got no idea what I'm doing with the microphone. However, I've got tons of ideas on why I'm doing the different things that I'm doing while I'm playing the drum set. Alright, let's talk about gear and what you need to be aware of when you play it. Cymbals are the absolute loudest part of the drum set, and when you've only got one microphone to work with, you've got to create a balanced drum sound in order to get good results. This is mainly done by playing consistently, but the gear you use also makes a huge difference. In my setup, I use relatively thin hand-hammered crashes because I find that they're not quite as loud and brash as heavier cymbals. I play my crashes with around low to medium strength, except when I'm ending a fill or crashing into a chorus and I just need that extra power. I'm always highly aware of how hard I hit my crashes, and chinas for that matter, because they can easily drown out pretty much everything else in the mix. My right cymbal, on the other hand, is super heavy. This is a 20-inch Sabian heavy ride, and the only reason I'm using this ride ahead of any other ride is that it's great for cutting through the mix. I've got a whole bunch of ride cymbals lying around from different brands and in different sizes, but for this type of recording, the heavier rides are just much more prominent in the mix, as opposed to my Paiste 602 vintage ride, for example. I generally like to use relatively large snare drums because I just enjoy the powerful and beefy sound you can get from them, and for this type of recording, having a big snare drum is pretty much necessary. You see, if you play a very shallow snare drum, you might get a nice crack and some great rim jobs. I mean rim shots, but the microphone just won't be able to pick up all that body and fullness from the snare drum, and it might end up sounding whimsical. I usually hit my snare drum pretty hard, and I play a lot of rim shots, and I basically hit my toms as hard as possible, because they're usually the first thing to drown in the noise. In addition, I use a coated Emperor snare head, whereas most people use ambassadors, which are slightly thinner. The reason for this is that the Emperor head gives me a bit more heavy and powerful sound, which is just great for getting a more fat drum sound. Now, as you can see, I desperately need to change my drum heads. Old and beaten down drum heads just don't have nearly the same tone, power and volume, and they just end up sounding dull and flat. Plus, old drum heads just won't stay in tune. Drum tuning is super important no matter how you record, and this recording method is no exception. I like to tune my rack toms in a way so that the batter head is tuned slightly lower than the resonant head, so the toms get a bit more projection and articulation. On my floor toms, however, I tune the batter head slightly higher than my resonant head, so they get a heavier and more thuddy and beefy sound. As for dampening, I use a small piece of duct tape on my snare drum. Haters gonna hate, I know. And I also use a small piece of duct tape on both the batter and the resonant heads on both floor toms. The rack toms don't have any dampening on them because any unwanted overtones from smaller drums will be completely overpowered by cymbals, snare, kick and the background music. If I were to record in an actual studio with actual microphones right above each tom, I might use a piece of moon gel or duct tape on the rack toms as well. But when I record like this, I just need as much tone and volume out of my toms as possible. The only reason I use a bit of muffling on the floor toms is that they are just huge and they make a shit ton of noise. As for muffling the snare drum, this is a 14 by 8 inch steel snare. It is super loud and it has these completely insane overtones no matter how you tune it, so I just happen to prefer a little muffling on it. Last but not least, you always need to be aware of how hard you hit the various parts of the drum set. You need to be able to create a very balanced drum sound from the get-go, and you kind of need to be your own personal compressor. Hit the crashes and shines softer, hit the snare a bit harder, and hit the toms way harder. At least that works great for me and for the music that I play. If you spend enough time tuning your drum set and you get a great overall sound, that's gonna get you very far in and of itself. However, if you're aware of how hard you hit the different parts of the drum set, and you can play consistently and confidently, you can make pretty much everything sound great. And that's pretty much all I have to say about how I go about recording my drums. If you've got any tips and tricks, maybe about how to place the microphone, I'll happily accept it in the comments. That's it for now, thanks for watching.